You gonna join me for this video? Huh? I guess she's gonna join us. All right, in today's video, I want to share a few thoughts about the Sigma 60 to 600. If you've been watching my previous videos, my more recent ones, you will probably know that I picked this up at what I feel is a really, really good price. I've taken out a couple times on some small shoots. So far, I'm happy with it. I have a big trip coming up in a month and a half to Yellowstone where I really plan to put this to the test. So I'm looking forward to that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the neck strap. I'm not normally a big fan of neck straps, but I am happy that they put the mounts on the lens. That way you're not trying to carry the weight mistakenly from the body. All right. Whenever you have a big lens like this, you want to be mounting or holding on to the lens itself. That includes the strap, your hands, the tripod, anything. The camera should just sit there because you risk damaging the lens mount on the camera or even the lens itself. However, just because this is a neck strap doesn't mean you probably want to be wearing it like this, to be completely honest. I give you about 15 minutes of wearing it like this, and you're probably going to regret it. So, how I'm making use of the neck strap is as a wrist strap. Gotta love the small dick energy. You know, nothing like some drag racing in a residential neighborhood. Yeah, keep it up. Anyways, you're probably thinking, this is a neck strap, not a wrist strap. I have an older video that I covered this, but I'm going to cover it again. It is possible to use these as a wrist strap. All right. Easily enough, you take the strap like this. I got my palms facing out with thumbs down. Grab the strap, rotate it in like this. I'm going to bring my left hand through. Bam, wrist strap. And so I'll actually carry it around when I'm walking. If I'm not using a monopod, I will carry it by the tripod mount right here. I'll use this as a handle. Now, with that said, I wish this was longer. I've done this with my Canon 500, which has a big mount, and so I can get my whole hand around it. This case, I can only get 2 fingers around the tripod mount. But I've made use like this, and if I drop it, right, it's going to catch, it's going to hold pretty securely. So that's how I carry this lens with the neck strap. I do not put it around my neck. That is painful. It is miserable. It sucks. It's just not effective. I use it as a wrist strap. Otherwise, I do just recommend having a monopod, gimbal, tripod, whatever, because this is a bulky lens.
I raved about this 60 to 600. I think I'm going to return it, and I think I've made a mistake.
I feel bad for her. I can understand where she's coming from. Gear regret sucks. You paid a lot of money for something, you took it out a few times, it seems to be awesome, and then you take it out on that one shoot and it doesn't deliver. But the question is there something wrong with the gear, or was it just the wrong situation? Right tool for the right job. Was this the wrong tool for the wrong job? She complained that it was really hard to move fast with this lens. Well, yeah, this is a big lens. All right, this is going to be very hard to move fast with when you're at a sporting event. But maybe you do need all that zoom. Well, then maybe the answer is something with a shorter zoom range, or even a prime lens. There's something to be said about prime lenses. When I got into photography, most of my lenses, except for the Nifty 50, were all zoom lenses. I thought that's where it's at. I thought, why do you want to restrict yourself to a prime lens? And at some point, I made a huge shift in my photography, and I stopped using zoom lenses. In fact, for a long time, I only had 2 zoom lenses. I'm up to 4 now. But I was down to 2 zooms and like 30 primes. And one thing the primes helped me with was to stop overthinking the shot, to understand what I had and to work with it the best way possible. Now, the problem with zooms like this is a 10x zoom. It goes from 60 to 600. That is a lot of zoom range to overthink your shot. So not only is this a big lens to use at a sporting event, but if you're trying, like in your head, to make the decision, like, do I need to be tight? Do I need to be wide? tight, wide, you're going to miss the shot. So then maybe a lens, something like this, is more appropriate. It is smaller, has a shorter zoom range, and a faster aperture, especially for sports if you're indoors. This is the Lumix 70-200. 7200 is like my favorite zoom range of all time. You're not getting too tight, you're not getting too wide, but you do have a little bit of room to play with. Maybe something like this would have been better for her. Something I encourage all photographers to try out when they're new is to go prime for a while. This is my Panasonic Leica 200. And it was with this lens that I started making the push towards prime. I started realizing out there doing wildlife photography that I was just futzing around too much instead of just framing, getting the frame with what I had. I couldn't decide. Do I want to be wide enough and try to get the whole animal, or should I try to tighten in on the head and make it a portrait? And not just in wildlife photography, but in many forms of photography, you don't always have a lot of time to sit there and overthink everything. So how can one be effective with such a huge zoom range? Well, when I went out recently in the last video when I was driving around, and I didn't cover this in the video, but I'm going to share it with you now. One thing I did was I set the lens to 300 millimeters and locked it. All right, let's bring it up to 300. And it's got this little feature right here that allows you to lock the lens in place. All right, so it won't, see, it's not going to move. Otherwise, if I unlock it, you see over time, it starts to move down and it will open back up. So they made that feature, I think, just to help keep the lens in one place when you're transporting it. I actually use this in the field. I will set it to 300 and I'll work with it like it's a 300. And it's not too wide, right? I can still get a better, tighter perspective on the subject. However, it's not too narrow either. Now, the problem with too narrow of a focal length, it can be hard to find your subject. If I'm all the way out 600 and I put it up to my eye and then I'm trying to find that animal with a very, very narrow field of view. And the 300 is not too narrow, it's not too wide. So I will leave this at 300 when I'm out and about. And I treat it like a prime. Like I just trying to find the subject. And if I can get the shot with 300, I'll leave it at 300. If I need to go tighter or wider, then I'll do it. And the great thing with this, even though it's locked, it doesn't take much pressure to open that lock up or to break the lock, if you will. So I recommend locking it in at a focal length. You don't have to use the full focal range. Something people are going to do with this lens is they might be out and about, so they're going to do this. They're going to be out and about, and so they're going to take it all the way down to 60. They want it down as short as possible. And then they see an animal, and they go all the way out to 600. And then they go all the way back in, and all the way back out. In, out, over and over again. This brings us to my number one complaint of zoom lenses, is that most zoom lenses, except for the 7200 range, and Sony's got that 200 to 500, I think, which is pretty cool because it does not change length when it zooms in and out. What's the problem with this? Well, whenever it zooms out, air is being pulled inside the lens. Now there's filtering that's going on. This is a sport lens, right? It's got the weather protection. What they mean is there's a lot of dust filtering going on, trying to keep dust from being pulled inside the lens. But over time, no matter how good the sealing is, dust will get pulled in. So when you're out there in the field and you're 60 to 600, you're probably going to send this in 2 to 3 years to get cleaned out. When you're out, try to limit your focal range when possible. That's why I do 300. I figure most of the time with wildlife, 300 is probably as wide as I'm going to need to be, and I might need to go up to 600. So I'm not pulling too much air into the barrel. Also, response time. It takes a lot less time to go from 300 to 600 than it does 60 to 600. It's too much of a thought process. Now, I do like the range. I really do. I'm looking forward to this trip of putting this lens on a body and leaving it on that body the whole time, not swapping lenses on that camera the whole time. That way I can do some casual landscape at 70 or 100 mil or some wildlife at 600. I'm really looking forward to that flexibility, and I'm really hoping it delivers. I'm pretty optimistic it will, we'll see how this works out. When I reflect on my mistakes as a young photographer and I see a lot of new photographers making the same mistake, that gets me thinking that maybe this lens isn't right for new photographers. Sorry, that's my opinion. You're welcome to disagree with me, but I really believe people that are new to photography should go out and pick up a prime, a 200 prime, 400 prime, whatever, and work with that prime. Think about composition, think about getting the subject, and don't think about trying to find the perfect focal length, okay? I think people are gonna burn themselves out on a lens like this. They're not gonna get the shots, and they're gonna get mad at the gear. All right, so the next thing about this lens is the massive front element. It is 105 millimeters. That's huge. There are not a lot of filters out there for 105. However, as I think about it, I don't think I ever want to put a filter on the front. Now, I know the argument for putting on a UV filter to protect the front element. I don't like putting unnecessary filters in front of my lens. This is already a pretty slow lens. I shoot it at f8 all the time, so I don't think I ever really need an ND filter for anything. So maybe I'll get a CPL filter, but at this time, I'm not planning to get a filter for this lens. So let's talk about the aperture. This is a pretty slow lens. It really is. Now I know it says f4.5 to 6.3, so at 60 mil, it's f4.5, which is kind of fast, but then it goes down to 6.3 at 600 mil. Now you're probably saying, what do you mean going down? That's a bigger number. Yes, the number is bigger, but you have to remember, bigger the number, the less light that's coming in. That's why I said it's going down. It's getting less light. That's how I always refer to it. And this is my second complaint, my second beef I have with most zoom lenses. Many of them are variable aperture, meaning that the aperture changes as you zoom out. Most of the time when I'm in the market for a zoom lens, I'm looking for a fixed aperture lens. Like I recently bought the Sigma 16 to 28 because that's a fixed aperture of f2.8. And that to me was, for me, it was one of the biggest selling points. I like fixed aperture, and that offered fixed aperture. However, that's really, really hard to get with telephoto lenses. So how I work with this lens and lenses like this, 99% of the time, I'm going to set it to f8. Even if I'm shooting at 60 mil, I'm setting it at f8. That way, if I'm changing the zoom, the one thing I know that's not going to change is my aperture, because that actually for me is kind of frustrating. And one feature these cameras don't have is an offset for the aperture. Now, to me, I think that would be an interesting feature request for a camera, to be able to set for a specific lens, or maybe all lenses that are zoom and variable aperture, is an aperture offset to say, no matter what the fastest aperture is, go down a third of a stop or half a stop or even a full stop, no matter what. That way, when I'm zooming in and out, even though my aperture is changing still, at least it's stopping down just a hair, so I'm still getting slightly better image quality. And that's something I haven't seen yet in any cameras, at least the Lumix cameras that I have. But overall, I am pretty happy with this lens, especially considering the price that I got it for. So for me, it's still worthwhile. I just got the S5 Mark II. This is the Mark I right here. So I'm looking forward to putting the Mark II on very soon and going out and testing it. And that's probably the combo that I'll take to Yellowstone, will be this with the S5 Mark II. Really looking forward to that trip. I need a vacation, something fierce. Well, that wraps up this video. I'm sure I will have more opinions to share down the road as I do more with this lens. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.